This episode may contain language or discussions that may be offensive or triggering. Refer to the episode summary for details. Welcome to the SheConfidential podcast. My name is Charlene Ketchum, and today I am chatting with Dr. Sylvia Bartley. She is the Senior Director for Health Equity at Medtronic. She's a neuroscientist, she's an advocate, and she's a champion of social change. And she's dedicated to eliminating health, education, and economic disparities. A lot of her work is guided by a greater spiritual purpose rooted in mindfulness and intentionality. And today we are talking about the intersectionality between spirituality, neuroscience, and emotional health, and her book, Turning the Tide, Neuroscience, Spirituality, and My Path Towards Emotional Health. So thank you so much for being here to chat with me today. I've been really looking forward to this conversation since our mutual friend Sharon Jameson introduced us. So shout out to Sharon. She is amazing, and I appreciate her for making this connection.
Yeah, me too. And it's a pleasure to be here with you, Charlene. And yeah, big shout out to Sharon. She's introducing me to these phenomenal people, and I'm just forever grateful.
She's a gem. She's an absolute gem. When we need as many gems like Sharon
Hmm.
and you more than ever, because the world has been feeling really heavy right now and for the past
Hmm.
couple of years in particular. And we know that everyone's navigating their own battles and emotions. And one of the first questions I had for you is just how do we navigate all those emotions without becoming overwhelmed by them?
Yeah, that's a great question. And as you said, we've been through it, the last 3 years. Who would have imagined when we woke up on New Year's Day 2020 that our lives would be flipped upside down and we had to reimagine how we lived and how we did things and what's really important to us and just trying to get through every day. And so, one of the things that comes to my mind is this acronym, which is NUTS. When you ask about how do we manage through this very difficult time that we're living through, and NUTS is an acronym that's used by psychologists and therapists to help people get through stress. So there's some science behind it. But I see if I can remember all. N means a novelty of an event. So with COVID, very novel, very unexpected event that took us by surprise, right? It's very new. The U is unpredictable. So obviously with COVID and the racial justice and all what's going on, it's very unpredictable. Let me see if I can remember what the T is. Oh my Lord. I am blanking out on the T, but S is around the sense of control. And the T will come back to me shortly. But most of these things we cannot control. But the only thing we can control is what we can control. And so as we, come out hopefully of COVID, and we're still in this period of a little bit of racial tension, but we're still in a very difficult space. One of the things that I've learned is really control what you can control. And for me, it's giving back to my community. That's something I can do. Controlling what goes into my body, controlling how I respond to certain things, controlling who I have in my life, just really making choices that are better for me. And that I think is really important when we think about living through these tumultuous times. Control what we can control, because then we have a sense of agency, we feel better, we've achieved something, and hopefully we've given back and we've done our bit in our sphere to make this world a better place.
Yeah. And how does a lot of people mention being of service is healing and therapeutic? Is there a neurologic or is there a scientific explanation for that?
Absolutely. In giving back does so many things for you, and there is some data out there that talks about the benefits of volunteering. So there's some information, and this information we may need some more data to make it a little bit more valid. But volunteering can definitely decrease the risk of depression. It gives us a sense of purpose and teaches us valuable skills. and it helps people start to physically and mentally be active. It's a very positive distraction, which will reduce stress levels, and even there's some data out there that says it may help you live longer. And it also gives you the ability to meet other people. So one of the things I like to talk about is transformative volunteering. And to give you an example of that, you and I are friends. I'm going off to volunteer for this non-profit organization for the homeless, and you wanted to connect with me because we haven't seen each other for a while. And I said, okay, Charlene, we've got to come down to this homeless shelter and we're going to do some work in this homeless shelter. And you're like, oh boy, I really don't want to do that, but that's my only opportunity. I get to see you. Hey, I may do some work. It will do people's, some good. So it's a win-win. I'm going to go off and do it. But you're really interested in just connecting with me. But you also have an opinion about the homeless. You have this opinion about them. I don't know what it could be, that maybe it's their own fault and, they're homeless because they want to be. And so you go in there with that mindset too. But when we get to the volunteering activity, we're met by the guy that's in charge. He tells us about the mission of the non-profit organization. And then he introduces us to some homeless people that tell us these heart-wrenching stories of the reasons why they became homeless, how they're treated as homeless people, and it pulls at our heartstrings. And you have a newfound understanding of, oh, okay, this isn't what I thought it was. This really is because of systems, infrastructure, systemic racism, whatever it may be. You have that deep understanding. So therefore, you're more empathetic towards the homeless. And then you have more energy to say, okay, I'm going to paint this room and rebuild this shelter. And it's really going to benefit people like this person that I just met and told me this nice, compelling story. So off you go, we're doing this work and you're very much involved. And then afterwards, we go for our drink. And you can't stop talking about the guy that we met, his story, how you want to help. And then you said, I'm going to come back to this place and I'm going to bring a couple of people with me.
Yeah.
You see, that's transformative. And that does many things, or the things that I kind of just mentioned in terms of you connected with people, you have a different understanding, and more importantly, it bridged the gaps between what they call the in and the out groups. So there's areas in the brain that is associated with in and out groups, groups where people look like us, they are like-minded, we have this affinity to connect with them, and when we're with them, a certain part of our brain lights up. There's science out there that shows when people are with people that are not in their in groups, sometimes the area of the brain that lights up is the same area of the brain that would light up if they saw something that was disgusting to them, like
Oh,
vomit or a pile of feces. And so that same area lights up in the brain when they're with people that are in their out groups. So volunteering can really help bridge that gap and get people to connect with folks that they wouldn't ordinarily connect with, but then also really help change some of the pathways in your brain that can kind of,
wow.
I don't want to say disconnect, but more associate people that are not uh, like you, if that makes any sense.
Yes. Wow, that's really fascinating. I mean, because that explains so much. I mean, that there is a scientific basis for people having discomfort when they're
Hmm.
around folks who are unfamiliar, and that kind of bolsters, the encouragement that we really do need to try to step outside our comfort zones as much as possible, whether it's a lot of times we just think in terms of race and ethnicity, but just people who are in different circumstances from us.
Exactly. And I want to stress it's not all physiology. I don't want people to think, oh, this is because of physiology that I don't like a certain group. It
Right.
starts with emotions and values and beliefs. Okay, but then there are parts of the brain that is associated with that, but we can rewire the brain, and that's a beautiful thing about the brain. It's plastic, and nothing is kind of concrete. We can rewire the brain with innocuous behaviors like our experiences, um, and the things that we do, right? It doesn't have to be anything traumatic to rewire the brain. It could be very innocuous as having a different experience. And I always say we are who we are because of our life experiences. But we can change those experiences and we could change our brain to support those experiences as well, if that makes sense.
Yes.
Hmm.
Yeah. And you mentioned earlier one of the other things that you found was helpful was not just changing, being able to change mindsets and thoughts, but also doing healthy things. Think about what you put into your body, what you consume. And so I want to talk a little bit more about that because I've been listening to a lot of your interviews recently, and I encourage everyone to do that. I mean, you share so much information. And so I heard you mention in one of your interviews just the foods that are inflammatory
Mm-hmm.
and limiting those things and how that can have a positive impact, not just on your physical health, but mental and emotional health as well. And
Mm-hmm.
so how does that relate to when we're talking about how we can cope with a lot of the stressors that people are experiencing right now?
Yeah, great question. And let me just bring it back a bit to stress, right? And stress, the way we respond to stress, we do four things: fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. And basically, this is a natural kind of physiological and physical response to stress. And in terms of the physiology, our body releases certain mediators and hormones to help us get through the stressful situation, to make us run, to make us fight, to crouch or fawn, whatever the situation is. These kind of mediators or hormones, they're released and they are protective because they bring us from that state of kind of arousal due to the stress and bring us down to homeostasis, the normal baseline of our body. And so when we're in like chronic situations, um, that protective mechanism becomes harmful, and that leads to things like chronic inflammation. And chronic inflammation is a known factor to conditions such as chronic illness like hypertension, diabetes, obesity, etc. And I say all of that because it's really important what we put into our gut, because there is a brain and gut connection, and what we put into our gut and inflames our gut also, in my mind, and there's a little bit of data out there to support this, inflames the brain. And
Mm.
this inflammation could be due to stress or it could be due to food. So when we're in a stressful time, as you mentioned, COVID and racial reckoning, it's really important if we want to uh, decrease our stress and to be in a better physiological state so we can handle the stress, to watch what we eat. And there's certain foods that really do inflame the stomach and has an impact on our brain, right? So it impacts our immune system, and it makes our immune system a little bit weaker. And this isn't all absolute. There's many factors that can come into play, but just generally, if you've got chronic inflammation, particularly in the gut or even anywhere in your body, that will have an impact on your immune system. It won't be so strong. And so one of the things that people do is to strengthen their immune system, um, is to manage their food and eat non-inflammatory foods. So we know that there's many foods that um, make people sensitive or people are allergic to them, such as peanuts and cow's milk and shellfish. All of those foods are very common foods that give people allergies or sensitivities. Um, and these foods are also shown, and there's some data out there to say that it causes depressed moods and brain fogs and headaches. It gives you
Hmm.
food cravings, make you fatigue, joint pain, skin changes, and also GI issues such as bloating, constipation, and gas. And I think most people can relate to that. And so eating non-inflammatory foods, which is a very difficult thing to do, which is eating foods that don't have any added sugar in them, that is free of gluten. Um, those foods are better for you because they are non-inflammatory. Together with taking some supplements that really help to boost your immune system, I think people can be kind of in a better condition to fight viruses such as COVID-19. Now, again, I want to stress this isn't an absolute science here. I'm not saying eat non-inflammatory foods and if it's going to be okay. There's many other factors involved, but this is one key component that we can control if we do have access to those kind of foods.
Yes. Thank you for that. And highlighting that link between the gut and our immune system, because I've heard a lot of people talk about that over the last year, in particular as it relates to COVID. And
Mm.
because there's, we have vaccines and all of those things, but as you noted, there's a lot of factors that contribute to us having, a healthy body and a healthy immune system. And so I'm glad that you went in detail about that link between stress and inflammation and our gut health and our immune system impact.
I know, and I don't want this to become a science lesson. I feel like I'm just talking.
No, that's it's
I'm
no,
talking
it's
science right
but
now.
no, it's I'm fascinated by these things,
Oh,
and
and I remembered what the T was.
yes,
My
let's
brain.
go back to
It's the
that.
perceive of threat. It's this in a nuts. It's the novelty of the event, unpredictability. It's the perception of a threat, and then it's the sense of loss of control. Yeah.
Okay, okay. And so it's so interesting with the body's response, the fight or flight response, or how our body responds to stress, because you noted that it's protective, but I guess if it's sustained, so if you're under constant, like we think about the effects and impacts of racism. So if you're
Hmm.
under ongoing stress as a
Hmm.
result of that, and your body has this protective mechanism, that protective mechanism actually is harmful when it's something that's sustained over a period of time. Am I misstating that?
No, you said it. You're absolutely correct, and you're spot on. And that's one of the things with racism, right? People talk about microaggressions, macroaggressions. For me, it doesn't matter. It's constant, and you and I know this. It's constant throughout our lives, and everywhere we turn, there's examples of racism, and we're just supposed to get up and get on with it. But it really is having an impact on our physiology, and that's why I believe we have a high prevalence of obesity, hypertension, diabetes, cancer, and other chronic illnesses in our community, not just because of the social determinants of health, but also because of the chronic stress, or in a physiological term, the high allostatic load that we are constantly carrying, which causes these mediators to become harmful, which causes chronic inflammation, which causes these conditions that I mentioned, together with depression, anxiety, and PTSD. And there's data out there that correlates inflammation, chronic inflammation, with racial practices such as segregation. So, you put a group of people in a condition where they're constantly stressed. They don't have access to good foods, they don't have access to good jobs, they don't have access to healthcare. There's blatant racism that they have to face day in and day out. That really impacts their lives. This has a toll on us. And there's another study by Dr. Geronimus. She termed the phrase weathering, and you're nodding because I'm sure
Yes,
you've
I've
heard
read
about that.
that.
That study was just amazing. There was a study done in Michigan where they looked at populations with low social economic status, white and black, and what they found, and they looked at these telomeres, and telomeres are almost like a clock on our chromosomes, and it tells us the kind of lifespan of a cell. So the shorter the telomeres, the closer the cell is to dying.
Okay.
Okay. And so what they measured in these telomeres in the chromosomes of both of these different groups, both have low socioeconomic status. The white population and the black population, same socioeconomic status. The black population has shorter telomeres than the white population, i.e. their cells were dying at an accelerated rate than the white population. Then when you break that down even further and look at black men and black women, the black women had the shortest telomeres, and they averaged it or equated it to an average of 70 years of that cell dying at a more mature rate. And so black women are having, the stress that we are
Wow.
under on a constant basis,
Mhm.
it's really having an impact on our physiology. Our cells are dying on average 7 years faster compared to black men and white uh, populations in the same social economic status.
That's huge. And
It's-
so for some people,
Mhm.
I've heard argue, well, I don't understand how this generation is that impacted because it's so much better. We have more equality and we have these things. And so my
Yeah.
question is, which, is there any type of generational impact? Can stress be passed down or inherited?
I don't know if stress can be passed down and inherited, but conditions can be, and how we respond two conditions can be. And I don't know who in this day and age would say, unless they're living under some kind of a stone, that, okay, we have it better today. No, we don't have it better today, because look at the murder of George Floyd. This is what we have to witness in 2020.
Yeah.
A black man being murdered on national television for the whole world to see. And the guy had his hand in his pocket like he was waiting for paint to dry.
Yeah.
And he was murdering a black man. He lynched a black man in public. And we had to witness that. And then we're expected to have no emotions around that. And we're expected to go to work and do our jobs. And we're expected not to complain and say this is just a one-off. But the world realized that this was just an horrific example of what goes on today. And that's just one. We can talk about Breonna Taylor, who was sleeping in her own bed.
Yes.
And no one was convicted of her murder.
Yeah, no one.
No one. That's two examples. Ahmaud Avery.
Yeah.
They went home for 3 months before they even got arrested.
Yeah.
These are 3 examples of many. And people may say, well, they're extreme examples, but they're examples that are going on a monthly, sometimes weekly basis. They don't all come to the forefront of the news. And this is the stuff that's in the background that we have to live with, knowing if we go out there and put a foot wrong or look at someone sideways and somebody don't like the way we responded to them, they can use asking to weaponize ourselves.
Yes.
Because that's what's called white supremacy, that is very prevalent and blatant in this society today. So, no, this generation, we're still going through it.
Yeah. And when we talk about stress and this and seeing all of this, I think about kids, and because we talk about how resilient they are, but, I'm familiar with the ACEs, studying the impact on trauma and everything. And so when I think about all of those things, and you mentioned PTSD earlier, I'm thinking, when does this start? When does this impact of stress actually start to affect us? Does it happen when we're adults and we're more aware that these things are happening? Or does this actually begin in childhood?
I'm not an expert on ACEs, but I would hazard a guess that it begins really early on in childhood. Children are not immune for stress. I would even say it begins in the womb. When you have black mothers that are stressed out, that definitely, you're going to cause stress on your baby, for sure. And, I don't have any references or quotes around that, but I'm sure if you Google it, there will be some association with stressful mothers and the health of the baby, first and foremost. And then secondly, the conditions that we're in, of course, our babies feel it. We may not be, and particularly in the past, we may not have been equipped enough to even recognize it, name it, and give children the support that they need. But it has an impact on kids at a very, very early age. Some that they carry it with them throughout their lives, and then it shows up bad as an adult. But, I'm sure if you talk to psychotherapists, psychiatrists, they will tell you childhood is where most of these stressful times or emotional distress started from.
Yeah. And so, unfortunately, we don't have a magic wand to change this world and clean up the world. And you'd said earlier, you'd opened our conversation with saying we can only focus on the things that we can change, which usually start with ourselves. But given like this heavy baggage weight that most Black people around the world carry, how do we start to tackle that?
Yeah, look, there are many things that we can do, and everyone is in a different condition, a different situation, have access to different resources. But for me, we have to start with ourselves. We have to start with our physical and our emotional health, because if we're not good, how can we be in a position to help anybody else? And there's many mindful things that we can do, irrespective of whether you have access to healthcare or not. Meditation, there is a ton of data out there that correlates mindfulness with reducing stress and anxiety. Like, it's not, I'm talking emotional health, I'm not talking mental illness, I'm not talking schizophrenia or paranoia or any of those things. Those kind of illnesses, you definitely need to go and get professional help. But emotional, when we're talking about the software that can be programmed,
Yeah.
there we can do things like the mindful approaches, eat non-inflammatory foods, meditation, exercise is a really good source of reducing stress. They say exercise sometimes is as good as some antidepressant medication, and it releases endorphins, it brings down your cortisol level. There is lots of science out there that talks about the correlation between exercise and good emotional and physical health. And then there's controlling the environment that we're in. What kind of relationship are you in? Is it healthy? Is it one that is supportive and allowing you to be you, or is it one that's where you're being berated and being picked on and you're not allowed to be yourself? Put yourself in those healthy relationships and a healthy situation that does nothing but nurture you emotionally, physically, and spiritually. Um, what are you watching on the television? Do we need to watch a barrage of attacks on black people across the country? I know
Yes.
it got too much for me. I
Yeah.
thought I was going to have PTSD every time I turned on the news.
Yeah.
So in the end, I really had to cut out the news and really manage in bite sizes what kind of news I took in and how I took it in. Because I really didn't want it to trigger me every day that I got up and there was another sensational news about something ridiculous taking place. So, controlling your environment, if you can, putting yourselves in an environment that is healthy, one that is not full of pollutants or toxins, right? So I know some people can't help but live in industrial areas. And if that is the case, go to your councilman, go to these industry places and make sure that they are not leaking pollutants and doing things in your neighborhood, making sure you're not in a sacrifice zone where this threshold is higher than what is recommended in terms of the level of toxins in the air, and
Mm-hmm.
making sure you have clean water and all of those things that most of us take for granted. These are the things that can really impact us. And then thirdly, we have this phrase around this great resignation or this great
Yeah.
reveal. And I think COVID is doing this to us. Are we in a job that we love? Are we in a job that recognizes us? Are we in a job
Mm-hmm.
that sees us and hears us and not just values us because of what we produce, but
Yeah.
also values our voice and our opinions and our expertise? Are we in a job that really fulfills our heart and our souls and that we're giving back and we're adding value in our respective field of work? There are many things that we can do, and some of them includes making these big, bold decisions that can dramatically change our lives because we got comfortable. But guess what? COVID just made us all uncomfortable.
Yes.
The murder of George Floyd made us all uncomfortable,
Yeah.
having these uncomfortable conversations. So now's the time to really get up and figure out who you are, what you want to do, what mark you want to have on this world, how you want to show up in this world, and do those things that support you first and foremost.
Yes. Yes.
Mhm.
I love all of that. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. That's excellent. And we can turn to your book. We can look at your book as well because that is kind of your recounting of your own healing
Mhm.
journey. So I would like to talk about your book, what inspired you to write it and how it helped you along your journey and how we can all turn to it as a resource as we design ours.
Yeah, thank you. My one and only book. For many years, I have been pondering with the idea of writing a book. And I never knew what it was going to be about. Then eventually I said, okay, it's going to be about neuroscience and emotional health and how there's an intersectionality between the two because of the work that I did in Medtronic with a therapy called deep brain stimulation and being in these scientific arenas, working with these kind of best neurosurgical teams around the world, being with these best business minds and phenomenal people in Medtronic, and just having access to all of this information and cutting edge research and knowledge and thoughts and ideas about brain modulation and depression
Yeah.
and schizophrenia and Parkinson's disease and other movement disorders, and really wondering what I'm doing in this space. So all of my life I've been a seeker, asking the question, why am I here? Why do I exist? What is my path? What is my purpose? Those questions never leave me. And I think asking those questions really got me to think about my experience living with depression, even though I didn't call it depression at the time, to why I'm working in this field and really understanding at a deep level the science behind that field as much as we can possibly know, because the brain is very complex.
Yeah.
To being a spiritual person, not religious, but spiritual, trying to align with my path and purpose, being in tune with the universe, and really, doing what I was placed on this earth to do.
Yeah.
And that questioning brought me to say, okay, I'm going to write a blog about emotional health and neuroscience, which then translated into a book. And I had to include that spirituality piece because the areas in the brain that's associated with these movement disorders, and movement disorders has a high correlation with emotional health, such as depression, um, together with these movement disorders, and then spirituality, this transcendence, this kind of connection to the universe, the mindfulness approach. It's all roughly in the same area of the brain. And the prefrontal cortex is one such area that is very common in all three of those spaces. So really trying to make that connection between all of it and just, tying the threads together. So that was a interesting process because I wanted to start off with the science. And then I was encouraged to write a little bit about myself so I can connect to the audience. And I really didn't want to do that because it wasn't about me, it was about neuroscience and spirituality. And by being forced, I was uncomfortable by this friend of mine in Minnesota, Sly Jones, who's a phenomenal playwright. He sat me, and we're Bush Fellows together, and he sat me down and he said, Sylvia, you need to connect with the audience and describe something vulnerable about you so they can connect with you and they'll read your book. And I felt very uncomfortable because I didn't have that vulnerability piece. I didn't know
Yeah.
what that could be. And it was when I was kind of having one of my depressive episodes, and it was sincerely bad at that point. Uh, I just kept saying to myself, why am I having these thoughts? Why am I feeling this way? And it just got me to question, what am I supposed to do with it? Because I'm of the belief if something happens, there's a lesson and we're supposed to do something with it. And so I thought, well, maybe this is my vulnerability. Maybe now I'm bringing the depression piece. But at that time, I didn't call it depression. I called it negative thoughts. I was down. I was sad. I felt a little bit isolated. And by the time I wrote the book and wrote this particular piece of the book, it was clear to me that it was depression. And here's the interesting thing. The book started off as something completely different. Then it ended up as it did. And then it was very cathartic. And when I got to the end of the book, I wrote the introduction again because it was different to the beginning. And I wrote that depression piece. And then I went to see a psychiatrist and got diagnosed. Yeah.
So, had you been dealing with depression before you started working on the book?
Retrospectively, I've been dealing with depression from 4 years of age.
Wow. And I thought that stands out to me because if because you didn't make that connection that that's what you were dealing with until after, and so that process of the writing really was, it sounds like you did a lot of examination and reflecting there.
And that's what happens, particularly when you're forced to write about yourself. And I think Sly Jones was, I've had a few Earth Angels in my life, and he was definitely one of them that just popped in and popped out again. But he was insistent. He was, you need to write about yourself and you need to be vulnerable. They need to see the vulnerable side of you. And I'm like, what the hell? I haven't got anything vulnerable. Why should I have to take that approach?
Yeah.
And I sat with that. And when I was in that depressive episode, that's what came up. I said, this is your vulnerability because people don't talk about depression. People suppress depression. People still think depression is the devil.
Yeah.
People still think you haven't got God because
Mm-hmm.
you are depressed. People still think you can pull your socks up and get on with it and you're just being dramatic and you're just being silly. And they don't recognize that there could be some physiology behind it or it could be reactive to a very traumatic situation. And so people don't talk about it. There's a stigma around depression still today.
Yes.
And being vulnerable, and I don't like using the term vulnerable, because if I said I got diabetes, no one's going to be like, well, that's being vulnerable, right? If I say I've got depression, I'm like, well, that's vulnerable, or you're brave,
Right.
you know. You put your ass out of door, somebody said to me
Right.
in that book. Because you talk so much about your depression. It doesn't bother me because the emails I've got from people that read the book and tell me how it's helped them in their lives, if it's helped one person, talk about it, seek help, it's all worth it.
Yeah. Because I think what happens so often, it took a lot of therapy, and I've always journaled. I didn't know I was journaling for therapy
Mm.
until I was an adult. I always kept a diary. And it's funny to go back and look at my diary when I was 6 and 7 and the connections I was
Mhm.
making. You see how we program kids. Like kids see so much.
Mhm.
We're really spot on and we're honest when we're kids. But then adults tell you no, not to acknowledge what you see or what you see is not really real. But when I go back and look at my journals and just kind of track things in my own life, I can see how I responded to traumatic events when I was a kid, as opposed to when I was a teenager, as opposed to when I was an adult. And I can
Mhm.
start to see when I started to repress things because that's what we get conditioned to do. And I know for
Mhm.
myself, growing up, none of the women in my life that were close to me were happy. I
Mhm.
didn't see women who, the most joyful woman I grew up seeing was Claire Huxtable on The Cosby Show. Like that was the most joyful woman I knew. I mean, they would be happy. The women in my life would be happy maybe around the holidays, because everybody cooks and you have like your family gatherings. But even the holidays were a stressful time because, there's gifts involved. People were trying to figure out how they can afford the gifts and, paying bills too. But never just happy or resting. Everybody was always tired and just making it. Like that would be the thing people would say, "Yeah, I'm just making it." And so I thought that was normal. Like I truly thought for a long time,
Mhm.
I thought that's just how it is for women in particular because women always seem to carry most of the load. And men, they would internalize it. They wouldn't say, I'm feeling overwhelmed or I'm feeling this, whereas the women would say it. But I just thought that's how life is. And so I think that for some of us, I know for me, growing up seeing that as a kid, I just expected people that you never were going to really feel peace. And then when I met people who actually seemed to be at peace and had joy, I'm like, huh, okay. And so I was curious, like, why are they like that? What kind of existence did they have? And then you learn like they may have experienced some traumas and things too, but they worked on their healing journey so that they could also experience joy. And that was my big thing like, wow, okay. I can learn how to be happy. I don't have to sacrifice my joy and my peace and my happiness just for everybody around me. Like that's not what love is supposed to look like. I thought that's what love looked like. Being miserable for the sake of loving other people.
Yeah, and you're spot on, and isn't that a shame, hey, that um, no one is happy, particularly the women, but that's how we were conditioned
Yeah.
as a people. If you think back, domestic workers, they had to leave their children at home and their families at home and go and serve a white family
Yeah.
to giving them their milk
Yeah.
from their breast, to cleaning their home, cooking their food, to staying there
Mm-hmm.
while their children are at home with hardly nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And then when they get home, they have to look after the home and try and catch up for lost time.
Yeah.
And so, and on top of that, we were conditioned not to have any emotions. We were conditioned that we were not to be happy. And I'll never forget the murder of Michael Brown. And when his body was lying on the ground in the sweltering heat for 4 hours,
Yeah.
there was a crowd around, his uncle was in that crowd, and they were being prevented from attending to the body. See, that's what they want us to see.
Yeah.
As a way to emotionally enslave us and say, this is your condition, and if you get out of line, this is what's going to happen. And they did that during slavery. They did that. Mike Brown wasn't during slavery. They still did that.
Yeah.
George Floyd's murder, for me, that akin to the same thing,
Yes.
where we had to watch that and expect not to have any kind of emotion. And so, as Black women and Black men in the Black community, it's all about what we can produce. And the day we stop producing is the day they literally throw us away, right?
Yeah.
And so people are working hard for the sake of everybody else, because that's the condition in which we were born into. Even today in 2022, in corporate America or any other place, it's all about how much we produce. And we typically produce 3 or 4 times more than our white counterpart for less money.
Yes. Yes.
And the day we stop producing is the day we're not valuable, and they will just replace us with somebody else.
Yes.
So it's so we have to be the change, right? We have to recognize that and see that, and we have to say, no, we're not going to accept that. And we have to first make ourselves happy. And you're right, happiness looks like what it looks like for you, and you're not doing it for everybody else. You're literally doing it for you. And then other people will get used to it, and we've got to model that behavior. So this can become a norm for us to be happy, to have fun. Even back in the day when Black folks were entertaining, they're entertaining with the blues. They're telling their story, their horrific experience and trauma through the blues. Now, whilst there's something cathartic about music and singing, they're singing our pain, and no one can sing the pain of Black people like Black people.
Yeah.
And that's why you have the gospel gut-wrenching
Yes.
tunes, because the pain is so deep and it's centuries deep. And so that doesn't even become joyful, you know?
Yeah, but you have to release it. You know, one of the things that I learned just even about myself is that I am very good at repressing. And it's so funny that I used to always think like this is like my great skill, because I used to work in an emergency department and in a lot of just like very high stakes environments. And people would always say to me, "You don't get upset. Like it can be absolutely chaotic." And that's when I'm even calmer. The more chaotic it is, the calmer I am. And not that I'm going to withdraw. It's like, this is what we need to do. I'm going to focus in on the problem. I'm not going to have emotions about it. I'm like, I just got to get through it. And then when I really started digging into that in therapy, I was like, wow, I can see where that comes from. Like, that's a survival strategy that I came up with. But for me, it's in every area of my life. If something is stressful or uncomfortable, I'm going to go on autopilot and I'm going to get through it. I'm going to manage it well in that moment. But how am I managing myself after? That's the part that was always neglected. And so I think it's really important for us to really like examine how are we releasing our emotions? Because for me, like I kept everything in, because in my family it's like you give it to God or you leave it alone. You didn't release it because that was a sign of weakness. And the last thing as a Black woman you want to be is weak. You can't afford to be weak. I always heard that. We can't afford to be weak. You have to keep going. Yeah, but you keep going until you drop dead.
Right, right. Yep, I hear you. But you know what I love about Black people, especially Black women, we're still here.
Yes.
We're still here in
Yeah.
abundance. We're still here in our beauty, in our strength, in our boldness, in our capabilities. You know, despite everything, we are still here. And that's what I want to tap into. What are the techniques that our ancestors passed down to us, the phrases that we heard as we grew up and didn't pay any attention to, that really has some kind of spiritual meaning to it in terms of how we move through this life. And I think there's a lot to be said, and we talk a lot about what is wrong with us and our condition, but there's also a lot right with
Yes.
us and our condition. and the conditions we create and what we can do
Hmm.
in with nothing.
Yes.
If you think about cooking,
Yeah.
we got the scraps, we got the carcasses, we got the
Hmm.
leftovers. They became delicacies still today that people eat. And soul food, okay, all soul food can't be good for you, but now we're getting to a point of healthier soul food,
Yes.
vegan soul food, and soul food that doesn't necessarily have to be, have all the sugar and
Hmm.
the the inflammatory components
Yes.
to it. But cooking, inventions,
Hmm.
entrepreneurship, creativity, hairstylist, oh my God,
Yeah.
artists.
Yes.
There's so much beauty in our community
Yes.
and given so much
Yeah.
to our communities. It's just amazing. And I'm always in awe of that. I'm always in awe of Black Americans and how just overcame the impossible to be thriving and striving and educated. Think
Yeah.
about that, the cost of education, the lack of scholarship, the lack of resources, but yet we are highly educated.
Yes. And I am appreciative that you emphasize that, because I think so often we get so caught up in the generational curses and things like that that we
Hmm.
don't realize or don't acknowledge all of the wealth that we have
Hmm.
inherited from our ancestors and that we continue to cultivate even today, and that we
Hmm.
can have these conversations that a lot of people these were quiet as they're kept conversations back in the day. We did not have these conversations, and now we're talking about depression. We're talking about how we're healing. We're not just talking
Hmm.
about the things that are painful for us. We're actually talking about how we're healing, and we're encouraging other people and making that space for each other, especially as Black women. Nobody has your
Yeah,
back like another Black woman.
like another Black woman. And we're healers too.
Yes.
Not only are we healing, we are
Healers.
healers.
Yes.
And we have people that are very supportive to other Black women and want to create this culture and an environment
Yes.
and community where we can share our skills
Yes.
and learn from each other
Mm-hmm.
and just be better together collectively,
Yes.
create our village. And I love that. And I'm seeing that a lot more these days. I'm seeing the strength and the power of the collective. And I think that's just a beautiful thing. And it gives me lots of hope.
Yes. Yes. What are you most? This will be my last question for you. What are you most hopeful for these days?
Hmm. Well, I think I'm really hopeful that we will get to a place where we will just acknowledge who we are and be who we are without the influences of the environment that we're living in and or the people around us. I'm really hopeful that particularly Black women will be able to stand in their truth and be in their kind of glory. And by that I mean they're taking care of their emotional, their physical, and they're doing what's making them happy. And the fact that we are, to your point, having conversations like this, the fact that we're examining the status quo, the fact that we're examining some beliefs
Mm-hmm.
and cultures that may not serve us well today, gives me hope. Because it only means that we're having this conversation as adults, we'll have it with the next generation. And this will just become a thing where we're not going to be called selfish because we
Yeah.
want to take a day off from being a mother and a wife or whatever that could be, but we're saying, okay, you're taking care of yourself, good. I got you, I got the kids. Don't worry about this, don't worry about that. I'm supporting you in that. And I'm seeing a lot of that these days. I'm seeing a lot of people talk about their emotional health.
Mm-hmm.
Um, one of the things COVID did was bring depression to the forefront because that's increased significantly
Yes.
during COVID and it's impacting people of colour more. So I'm grateful that there's more resources going towards that. So I'm just hopeful that we will remain a healthy, strong community of people and we'll be stronger and healthier and just in better conditions. And I'm also hopeful that we're not going to just fit into systems anymore. We're going to break it down. We're going to break down barriers. We're going to create new things that works for us.
I'm claiming all that in advance. Thank you. And where can people buy your book, Turning the Tide?
Oh, thank you. Yes, if you can go on Amazon and put Turning the Tide and my name, and that will pop up in there. Also, I have my kind of website, sylvia-bartley.com, and there you'll find a book. It will take you to where you can purchase it. Together with the podcast, The More You Know community show, where we really talk to change makers, people that are really making a difference to make this world a better place, particularly the Black community. They're telling their powerful stories. They're talking about healing, the power of purpose, their experiences. Pretty good conversations in those podcasts, and that also could be found on the website. And I'm delighted to have you on there, Sue.
Yes, I'm so excited to chat with you. And I'll make sure in the for those who are in the audience, they are those who regularly watch or listen to this show, you know that all of those links for Dr. Bartley's podcast and for the book purchase and everything in the website will be in the description box, whether you're watching on YouTube or on the podcast apps. Because your show, I've binged them, and you've been on so many other shows, so I googled your name and all these other interviews you've done
Oh,
came up. And so that's what I've been doing. So I've just been in Dr. Bartley's world for the past few days, listening to all these interviews that you've done, and so I appreciate you because you are certainly a healer,
mm,
and it's really inspiring that you've been able to merge your passion with your purpose, and that you're able to do that in a way that's helping address so many issues, but also to just really empower other people to tap into their own inner power. Because a lot helplessness, that's like the one of the
mm,
worst emotions. Because when you feel
mm.
helpless, you're just there, and you give people hope and you give people tools, and that's extremely powerful. So thank you for everything that you're doing, because it doesn't just, I know you get emails from individual people, but when you help one person, you're helping their entire family and the people around them. So thank you for everything that you're doing.
Thank you, and the same to you. Your platform and creating the space to have these conversations with lots of powerful people. I too listen to your podcast and your show, and they're amazing.
Thank you.
And you're doing it as well. So I appreciate all that you're doing for our community as well.
Thank
So
you.
thank you very much, Charlene.
It's about the collective. There's the power. So thank you so much. And everyone, check the description box so that you can make sure you check out Dr. Bartley's book and her podcast. And thank you so much. Until next time.